So it seems that there's one more to come in this series, after all. And this one is less about the modes of reincarnation and more about you. I'd like to contemplate this notion of trajectory. Reincarnation is a trajectory through time and space. And everything is moving, everything is turning. The Earth is moving, rotating on its axis, and then that's rotating around the Sun. And then the Sun is rotating around the galactic core. And then that's also spinning and rotating around some other distant supermassive black hole or other core. So we're all spinning and we're moving. And when you have forward momentum and you have spin, then you have a spiral. And all of life then is a spiral. And this is what incarnation is. It's also a spiral. So think about your life. Cellular life imprints itself in 7-year cycles. We know this. There are many other cycles, but the 7-year cycle is deeply woven into our cellular structure. So every 7 years, we go around some hidden sun, inner sun, and then we repeat over and over again until we die. And now the interesting part is, when something happens in one of your 7-year cycles, it is a repeat of an earlier pattern at the same moment and stage in an earlier cycle. You can contemplate this in your own life. Think of a major event in your life and consider when it appeared in your cycle. How old were you? Which 7-year cycle was it in? Which stage of that cycle was it in? If I give you an example from my own life, shortly after my 8th birthday, I was sent away to boarding school. Terrible time. And so it was a profound shock right at the beginning of my second 7-year cycle. And what that means is that I must have been imprinted with that shock shortly after I was born in the same place in the cycle. And it means I'm re-imprinted with that shock every 7 years. So at the age of 8, and then at the age of 15, and then 22, and then 29, and so on. And I can tell you a story for every one of those ages about something huge that has shaken my life. Not always a shock, but always some huge opportunity. So, for example, when I was 29 in 1996, at the same moment in my 7-year cycle as I was sent to boarding school, I had my first massive mystical experience. And for 3 days in the summer of that year, I was shaken to the depths of my reality. So what I learned from that is that the wounding that we receive is deeply connected to the awakening that we go through. And that there are phases and stages and sub-stages within the topography of our lives in which these portals open for us and events synchronize around us. And we enter these portals of potential deeper misery or deeper healing. Cellular life on this planet is so deeply rhythmic. It's mind-blowingly rhythmic. We don't often notice it, but it is. So look into these cycles in your own life. I discuss them in depth in the Venus sequence, my work on the Venus sequence, and the book that goes with that course. But I also want to open up then, of course, to the idea that these cycles go beyond a single lifetime. So in your last life, the same rhythms were operating. We incarnate because of our sanskaras, these unfinished wound opportunities. And the themes are passed on, but they're passed on in perfect timing. So every shock or awakening is logarithmic in that way. It's an equal distance apart and in succession. So our entire trajectory through time and space is dictated by these patterns, these karmic patterns. And there always come periods in which these shocks rock us. And then we have to open to that as deeper toxins come out to the surface and we flush them through. And then we have a period of integration before the next one comes. And then there are tremors and smaller shocks within the frame of the greater ones. It's all a beautifully orchestrated pattern of pain and release and freedom. And what really blows me away then is how deeply embedded these patterns are in our human biology. The body records everything because our body is like this hall of records. And all those past incarnations imprinted in our DNA, thousands of them. I assume it's encoded in the non-coding DNA, the junk DNA that scientists used to call it, because they didn't know how to read it. And junk DNA, or non-coding DNA, makes up 70 to 90% of our body. Our body's not like us, right? It doesn't just go on shoving trash into the earth. It's the most efficient, space-saving piece of biomachinery that there is. It's a perfect map of the workings of the universe. So anything we don't understand, we tend to think, oh, well, it must be junk. But no. Thousands upon thousands of incarnations are recorded in that DNA. All memories encoded in a fractal form. And it would take a fractal computer to unravel all those sequences, because they're not laid out in neat little lines like ordinary DNA. Only a fraction of our DNA is actually about building and maintaining the body. The rest is storage, just like your computer. And in the body, memory is fractal. So storage can be hyper efficient in that way. But it means it can't be deciphered like by a computer, unless you have this fractal computer, which we don't really have yet. So the only way you can really download those past memories is to access heightened states of consciousness beyond the mental plane, which most people aren't capable of yet. And then you can understand the fractal layers, and you can access them, because you need a higher mind. Anyway, I'm not suggesting that we do that. I'm only suggesting that our journey, our trajectory through time and space is encoded in our bodies. The past, the present, and the future. It's a huge thought that we are this living library, that we are following this trajectory in every life, and we carry the whole weight of the past with us, not just our incarnative past, not just ours, but the whole species. We're like this great sinuous river. We begin high in the mountains, as a spring in some distant, lonely past, and then we started living all these lives, these trickles, these tributaries, these waterfalls, until it comes down and becomes a river in the plains. And then it's joined by all these other streams and rivers that join and flow into ours. And the more evolved our journey becomes, the more we realize we're merged with the journeys of others. And of course, then we come to the delta and the river mouth and the ocean, and we all become one in the ocean. And where does that leave us? Probably right now you are approaching the ocean. You're approaching the phase in which all these different rivers are flowing into yours. And what that means is you're a little more evolved than the young tumbling in the mountains. And when you're a little bit more evolved, there's more karma, because there's more rivers coming into ours. They're joining down on the plains. And to reach the ocean, we have to take in all this karma and transmute it for the whole, for the sake of the whole. And finally, we then come to these incarnations where we begin to arrive at the delta, at the river mouth. And everyone knows that that's where there's the most sediment, right? The river is the muddiest there, and they're stirred up and confused until it's cleansed in the ocean. So consider these things in your own journey. We don't need to know exactly, but if you're approaching the ocean, then things will become more intense and cloudier, and at the same time somehow more lighter, because there's this huge rushing sense of anticipation that we're getting closer. Many of us would like to believe that we are coming to the end soon, that this is our last incarnation. I hear that a lot. It's actually highly unlikely. One's final incarnation is one of utter glory, it must be one of matchless splendor. Your consciousness will become so pure, like a diamond. You won't be dealing with heaviness anymore. You'll be packing away your things. You'll be working on the subtlest strings of ego, the tiny fibers of separation that you couldn't see before, but now they become visible in the vast light that you're accessing. So I think it's good to be realistic. I think that there's a pressure in a way from many teachers and from teachings, particularly the Eastern teachings. And that pressure is almost a pressure to complete our evolution now. There's this urgency to complete. I just think, why the rush? After all these thousands and thousands of incarnations, and we're coming finally towards the end and we rush? I think the opposite is needed. Slow down, linger, make it last, squeeze the juice out of these final incarnations. You know, they're going to be heavenly, they're going to be bittersweet. We're finally surrendering our ego. And of course, also the whole theatre's changing. You know, a vast change in the script is opening up the world. This is not a moment you want to miss. You know, these next incarnations could be the most amazing of all, as the Maya itself begins to quiver and dissolve. You know, this is not the act that you want to be missing. So I suggest being generous with yourself and give yourself time and be gentle with yourself. What's the hurry? You don't want to rush at the finishing line. It's not a race. Slow down, drift on the currents. They're going to take us there anyway, to the ocean. You know, and more advanced souls will be needed in the next generations. So in the light of all this, I want to invite you to contemplate your own trajectory. You know, consider even where you would like to reincarnate next. You know, play with this. What do you need to complete in this life in order for the next life to be a life of utter freedom? You know, this is the kind of view I want to encourage. It seems inherently healthy to me. You know, there's no need for this intense rush to get it all over. You know, that feels like it's coming from the ego. Just good to be, you know, just being. And in fact, just being is the very thing that actually brings the end sooner. So there's an irony, there's a paradox there, that's in slowing down, we actually get there sooner. You know, out of form, there is no time. But there's a level now where we can, some of us, can choose what we want, what we truly want, not from our ego, but from the depths of our soul. So consider, what does your ideal life look like, and dream that in. You know, your ideal life is actually the very life that's encoded for you. So here's the other irony, you know, the one that we feel like we're dreaming up is actually the one that's predestined. It's another paradox. So trust in your trajectory and the trajectory of others and those you love, because there is a perfection to it all. Death is perfectly timed. Death is actually, it's actually a place as well as a time. You know, we have to, because everything's moving, so we have to arrive at that place. And then the whirlpool opens, and then we pass through it into another birth. And probably we'll have a pause in between in the bardos. And then once again, we come out and we're born. But soon we're going to be coming into a new world with new vehicles, upgrades that will allow us to do things we can't even imagine. We'll get to be conscious of all this stuff in a form. We'll remember our past lives. We'll see our trajectory and those of others in clarity. You know, this is all coming, the time of resolution, the time of miracles. You know, so I have really two things to say to conclude this series. The first thing is, you needn't fear your death. You know, you needn't fear your death. Relax, and instead of giving in to the fear of death, participate in its arrival. Sense into it. Accept its perfection. And as others depart around the world, be with them with this sense of adventure and freedom and perspective. And even though death can be terrifying and filled with pain, it can also be filled with grace and compassion and gentleness. And the second thing, let's not rush our awakening. You know, this is, I want to sort of pause, be contemplative. Let life slide easily into death, and death easily back into life. And you be the witness, the creative witness. We can participate in this creation, and we can surrender, and we can just let it flow. There is no rush to awaken. There is no need for hours and hours of meditation with a frown on your face. You know, that won't get you there. You know, we can long for our freedom. Yes, the longing is important, but let our longing be balanced by pacing, by rhythm, by deep acceptance, and by deep, timeless patience. So, there it is. Blessings.